I thought this could be an interesting idea for a versus of Deshaun Watson and Russell Wilson, two players who got traded for in the same offseason. Teams gave up a ton of draft capital for them, and not just that, but paid them a ton of guaranteed money to the point where, as of right now, if either one of these quarterbacks isn't very good, which last year they weren't very good, then this could be an awful situation for both. So I thought this could be a fascinating discussion of who would you rather have. Off the field issues aside, with Deshaun Watson, calling it off the field issues is a bit tame, to say the least, but that aside, on the football field, who would you rather have? And so typically I like to start these off going with stats from their entire careers, but I actually think for these two guys, just going to last year might be a better jumping off point. So these are each of their stats in specific categories. So we have passer rating, that's what PR is, PFF grades, and to note that is the average season, not necessarily the overall grade, just the average season, and then EPA per play. So you see that Russell Wilson did perform better than Deshaun Watson did last year. Neither one were great, but Watson was kind of a mess. Russell Wilson wasn't good, but he was above replacement level. Again, the EPA was slightly better than 0, which, you don't want to be in the negatives there. You expect it to be better than 0, but, still, at least Wilson was able to stay afloat right there. He had a PFF grade of 66.2, passer rating of 84.4. He was above replacement level, but still not good, and especially by his standards, this was a disaster. But Deshaun Watson was below replacement level last year. Passer rating below 90, PFF grade below 60, and an EPA per play below 0. That is not good. That is a disaster, quite frankly. So last year, technically Wilson has the slight edge, but neither one were great. And the reality is, if both of these guys end up being this player for the rest of their career, then they're both disasters, and that's kind of it. As for their careers, though, it's actually pretty close. Passer rating is very close, only a 2.1 difference. Watson has the slight edge there. However, if you go over to Pro Football Focus grades, Wilson does have the edge in that category, an edge of over 6 points. So pretty significant edge, in fact, there. Although, worth mentioning, kind of the fact that it's the average season. Watson didn't have a very highly graded first year, so he has multiple years that kind of lower his average. It hurts him a little bit more being young into his career. The EPA does favor Deshaun Watson as well over Russell Wilson. And to me, neither one of them have like an obvious area where they have been in a better situation than the other one. I think they've both been in pretty good situations for most of their career, and maybe not like fantastic situations in terms of racking up stats, but very good situations for both of them, I would think. So again, it's fascinating. Russell Wilson does have the higher PFF grade, and worth noting, obviously, when having a passer rating season of 100 back, 10 years ago was more difficult to do than it is now. That's just something that's true. You see more guys come into the league and have passer ratings of 100 now than they used to. So you kind of give more credit to someone who's been able to do it, back when stats weren't quite as inflated. So because of that, you definitely factor that in as well. So maybe you would kind of point towards it being in Wilson's favor a little bit. So if we look towards those three categories you see on the screen, stats, playmaking, and game manager, these are the three kind of categories that I feel like are the most important three categories that I tend to view when evaluating these players. Now, just to be clear, you can be ahead in 2 out of the 3 of these categories, and that still doesn't necessarily mean that I will give you the nod. But for stats, it is interesting. I mean, you could argue Watson has the better stats. You could make that argument because, couple of his stats are better over the course of his career than Russell Wilson's stats are. I think I'm still going to give the edge to Wilson, though. Last year, Wilson's stats were still better than Watson's. And I think at the end of the day, we're not paying that much attention to last season because, like I said, if either one of them repeats what they did last year, it's not very good. It's not looking very good. So kind of you're hoping that they are better than that player, but I'll still factor it in a little bit. Although I would probably, I think the other argument is both of these guys have an excuse for what went wrong last year, right? Watson's was he didn't play football for, over a year. Russell Wilson's was that it was the Nathaniel Hackett. It was a tough situation for him to be in. I think they're both reasonable excuses. I don't necessarily hold it against either one of them to have kind of rougher years. Although I would say I think Watson's excuse is probably a bit more valid in terms of, more understanding of why he would have a bad year than Wilson's. So that could be an argument to put the stats in Watson's favor. I do think, though, I value PFF grades more than I value passer rating and EPA per play. Wilson significantly done better, more consistently in the stats department. I am giving the nod to Wilson. Playmaking's interesting. Playmaking's very interesting. One thing about Watson that he was never really talked about enough, I thought, was he would run himself into some sacks. He would also run himself out of some sacks, so it kind of went both ways. People didn't really talk about that. I guess you could argue the same thing with Wilson. Both of these guys will run their way into sacks at times, but can make some spectacular plays. Just to be clear with playmaking, I'm not just talking about when you are able to, scramble outside the pocket and throw the ball 50 yards down the field. It's simply, the way I view it is, if there's, play concept that has been, ran, the offense, gets you in a specific situation, what do you do beyond that? If it's a bad situation, how do you turn it into a good situation? If it's a great situation, that's not really what I value here. It's more so because, whether you do well or not well, that's more of a game manager thing for me. It's more of the bad situations, or just if it's a good situation, but you turn it into a great situation. Something like that. Going above and beyond, I do think I would give the edge to Russell Wilson. Again, the question is, who do you give an edge to right now? And I do think Watson probably is someone I would bet on more to do it right now, which is why it's a very difficult discussion, because I think over the course of Wilson's career, I certainly give it to him. But who would I pick to do it, to be a better playmaker next year? I actually might pick Deshaun Watson, because I feel his playmaking was actually still pretty good last year. So actually I'm going to give the edge overall to Watson right now, but Wilson, throughout the course of his career. As for the game manager side of things, who do I think is the better game manager? I do think I give this to Russell Wilson. I think Russell Wilson has been the better game manager over the course of his career. I don't think it's been massive necessarily, but I do think Russell Wilson has been, I think he's a pretty good game manager. I actually think he doesn't get enough credit for, when things were going well, how good of a game manager he was. So I think I'd kind of give that to Russell Wilson. So comparing Russell Wilson and Deshaun Watson, listen, it's hard with these two players. It really is. I think you could certainly argue either way. I think if you have to tell me, hey, a gun to your head, you need to make the playoffs next year, but we're going to let you pick one of these two quarterbacks, Russell Wilson or Deshaun Watson. I think I'm picking Deshaun Watson. I do. I think right now, give me Deshaun Watson. Obviously, Wilson's had a better career, but I think I just, what it comes down to is I kind of buy the Deshaun Watson excuse a little bit more than I buy the Russell Wilson excuse. So I think there's a chance they're both very good next year, but I'm going to be more willing to bank on Watson bouncing back than Wilson. And really, that's what it comes down to. It's, are these guys going to bounce back? Because if either one of them is what they were last year, it doesn't matter. It's irrelevant. If they're both good, well, then it's a really interesting discussion. And then maybe I'll say that I'll take Wilson if you were to tell me they'll both go back and have career years next year. Then give me Russell Wilson. But I think there's a better chance Watson bounces back than Wilson, so I'm going Watson. But yeah, those are my thoughts. What are yours? Let me know in the comments below. Always love hearing from you. And of course, as always, thanks for watching.